Well, it seems like everyone and their grandmother has been talking about Empire of Silence and the Sun Eater series by Christopher Ruocchio. Now, I actually put a request in for this book from the library a couple of weeks ago, and in the interceding weeks, like everybody has put out a video, it feels like, on this book or this series. So I kind of feel like I'm late to the party in some ways, but also like great minds think alike. I have to say, though, it's been very tough because I've intentionally tried to not look at any other reviews for this book, as to not bias this review, not bias my impressions of it. But now I have to say I'm very excited to go and watch a bunch of these other ones because I'm curious if you watching this or if other folks had the same thoughts about this that I did, drew the same comparisons, loved the same things, were frustrated at the same parts, and overall came away feeling how I did about this book. So yeah, this is going to be a two-part review. The first half is going to be spoiler-free. If you have not read Empire of Silence, if you're not familiar at all with Sun Eater, this would be a great primer. I'll tell you a little bit about the book, my initial impressions, and then the back half, I am going to be diving in sort of full spoilers, talked about the things that I really loved, talk about fan theories and speculations about where I think this can go, and of course, the rest of the series, there's a lot more books still, so there's a good chance I could be wrong about a lot of things, and for folks who have read it, maybe they're going to be laughing along in the comments, thinking, oh, Paul, you have no idea what's coming next. If you enjoy this kind of content, if you enjoy these kind of videos, be sure to like and subscribe. This is a series, a little bit of spoilers, that I could see myself doing a lot of reviews on. I really did enjoy this first book in the series. There's going to be a lot of comparisons that I'm going to draw to it to other works. And I think it did a lot of things extremely well, and I'm very excited to keep reading it. So if you enjoyed sort of some of my reviews, my more in-depth stuff on things like Red Rising, you might enjoy this as well, because I'm definitely going to be making some comparisons between these books. Okay, let's jump into it. Let's talk about Empire of Silence. Now, this is a first book in a long-standing series, the Sun Eater series, and it's done in such a way where I think immediately evokes memories to a series that has had a lot of mixed opinions. I have a lot of mixed opinions or mixed feelings about this series, but you have to draw some comparisons to The Name of the Wind in the way that this initially is structured. So it sort of starts off, the main character, Hadrian Marlowe, is talking about his history, his legacy, is basically writing his journal, essentially telling the story of his life. And it's done in such a way where throughout the book, you get these little interspersed, intercut moments where you have this little thought or nugget. It's like, I didn't know this at the time, but this, or I didn't realize this person would be such a big deal in my life, or I didn't know this was the last time I was going to see this person. And having these sort of cutaway character moments of sort of this older, more mature version of themselves, sort of looking in through their younger eyes, makes for a very technically challenging book to write, but one I think is written incredibly well. And that's the thing I want to start off first and foremost talking about this book, is that this is, it rides right up to the line of this could be one of the most pretentious books you've ever read. Like, it is like 1 millimeter back from being just extremely pretentious. The over-the-top prose, the way the characters speak, this sort of hearkening back to like the older classics, etc. But it makes so much sense in the context of this world that, like so many that come before it, you have to make the comparisons to Dune. There are so many Herbert comparisons that can be made here, and I will touch on more throughout the course of the book. But this sort of hearkening back to the classics, the idea of the church or the chantry, sort of reasserting themselves, the idea of this very like sort of Roman inspired classic, the very clear hierarchies in society. There are a lot of books that you immediately will draw comparisons to if you've read a lot of, I think, sort of the mainstays and the staples of the science fiction genre over the last, 40 years, I would even say. But this book does enough and does them differently, and I think doing it through this retelling lens gives enough of a differentiator from books like Red Rising that deal with this, sci-fi opera epic with the Roman inspired whatever and the different caste systems and blah, blah, blah. Like, it does enough differently, I think, in part because of this different framing and structure that, yeah, you get that sort of initial moment of, oh, and then you just dive into it because the world building is so rich and so lush and so robust. And the way the characters interact with the protagonist, the politicking, the real logical thinking that goes into the decisions that he makes, even those decisions put him in horrible situations, I think is just such a fantastic primer to set up the rich story that this book is. Because while this book definitely has, I would say, some sort of pacing issues throughout the center of the book, I would say in general, this is almost like two books. It follows sort of two very distinct arcs. So to me, this is like a two for the price of one book. This could have easily been like a 300-page kind of quick, knock down, drag out kind of book, but it really does go through this sort of beautiful series of arcs, and I think does end in a very satisfying way. Now, what is Empire of Silence? I've sort of talked about some characters, talked about some stuff. Sort of what is this book? Well, basically, we're in the far future of humanity. We are in a sort of prototypical techno-feudalism society. There's sort of these various human factions. Earth, very Foundation Asimov-esque style, has sort of faded into history. We've sort of lost Earth, or we know that we destroyed it. We sort of ventured off into space. And religion sort of popped up around that. We had AI, or thinking machines, and the Butlerian Jihad again, if you're familiar with Dune. We had this sort of, we can't use technology, so we sort of regressed back in some ways. We still have like warp drive, and we still have faster than light travel, but there's very basic technology. The church, or the chantry, at least in this particular portion of the galaxy within the Empire, think Imperium of Man, think Warhammer 40K. You're getting where I'm going with this. There's a lot of terms and phrases and concepts that are taken from other places, but again, mished and mashed together in a really fun and creative way. And similar to, if you've watched the Foundation TV show, not quite in the same way of the genetic dynasty in terms of cloning, but genetics and eugenics is a very prevalent theme throughout this. The idea that basically the amount of genetic engineering you have kind of impacts your place in society, or you need money in order to give your family genetic engineering so you can live longer, as an example. And it follows, again, Hadrian Marlowe, the main character here. He is the son of a noble house. He is the firstborn son of a noble house, and he basically grows up his entire life thinking that he is going to be the heir to his family's estates and their uranium mines. They are extremely wealthy. They are connected through his mother's side directly to the emperor himself, and the father as well, sort of long-standing history and legacy, etc. And these are for families who people live, 500 plus years when you're at this sort of a level of genetic engineering. So he basically grows up the very classic, somewhat pampered son of this royal house, learning to duel, learning defense, and he has a very strong affinity for languages. And he has this, they're called scholiasts. They're very similar to the certain characters in Dune, the sort of the thinking computers, the mentats, if you're familiar with that sort of thinking machines. Not quite that extreme. Especially if you're thinking of David Lynch's Dune, not quite that extreme, but they, basically can remember everything. And they are in that realm for sure. Again, a lot of strong Dune influences here. The world and the setting, though, is very much traditional Roman inspired. So they use a lot of the same terminologies that you'd be familiar with from that, and a lot of the same sort of architectural looks and things. Again, more akin to a Red Rising. And it basically follows his character who, he's a softer, gentler soul. He has this younger brother who's kind of, in some ways, things he aspires to. He's bigger, he's stronger, he's, more aggressive, and the father sort of sees more of that in him. And Hadrian realizes there sort of comes a point where he realizes he's no longer going to be the heir. So he sort of acts out a little bit, makes some sort of more rash decisions, and basically comes to the point where his father's like, you're not going to be the heir. And that basically sends him on a path where they're going to essentially sell him off to the Chantry. Now, the Chantry and their inquisitors think of like the absolute epitome of like over the top, overbearing fascist religion. They control a lot of parts of society with an iron whip. Again, this idea that people might push technology too far. They worship Earth essentially as a deity, and the idea that humans manifest destiny to take over the galaxy, and that is important because humanity as a whole is at war. They have discovered various alien species and have subjugated various alien species across the different planets that they've colonized, but there's one other spacefaring civilization that they've encountered, and they are very much at war with them. The Sealson? Keelson? I don't know how to... I'm going to put it on the screen. How do you pronounce that word? You tell me in the chat. Sealkin? Keelson? Sealson? I don't. Maybe there's if you listen to the audiobook and and you're cringing internally, just ignore it every time I say it for the rest of this. I literally sat down before this, recording this, and looked at it and went, I am going to be screwed on the pronunciation. I'm going to say Sealson because it's the easiest to say. Cool. That's the one. And they are humanoid and they are somewhat intelligent, but they're hyper aggressive. Think like giant 9 foot tall, kind of pale space ogre type things. They're trim, they got horns and stuff, and they do eat people and each other. Like, they are threatening. But they have culture and they have language, and again, they're spacefaring, and humans have interacted with them enough to have learned their language, which is cool. And the main character actually does end up learning parts of that language, which does play a plot point later on. But essentially, Hadrian is sold off to the Chantry, and he doesn't want to go because he will basically be forced to become an Imperial Inquisitor. If you've watched I don't know what direction I'm going to point in here, but I did actually a video on Eisenhorn recently, another Imperial Inquisitor from another great sci-fi IP, so great, and some similarities there, for sure, in the sense that they are going to be torturing people, very much a la First Law. I got a lot of similarities there as well, to sort of, bring out the knives and get the torture information out of people, and he just I don't want to do that. So basically hatches a plot and a scheme to escape and go and become a scholiast, because his vision, his dream is to be like one of his childhood heroes from the stories, because again, he's very much this sort of classic romantic, and he essentially is going off to try and accomplish this, but he's got to do so very covertly, because once you're sold off to the Chantry, you're in it. They will hunt you down, they will throw you in prison, they will torture you, they will kill you. This is very much this oppressive fascist government, or it's not even a form of government, this religion. It's sort of, again, if you even speaking heresy can land you in trouble. And constantly throughout the book, they're worried about cameras catching them in this sort of very much Big Brother-esque world that they live in, where at any given time you could be sort of brought up under charges of heresy or treason. And let's just say things don't go according to plan, and he ends up on a world he did not expect, in a situation he did not expect. And he essentially has to forego his entire life as a noble, and live as a commoner, as a peasant, as sort of the lowest of the low, and try and build his way back up. And I'm going to sort of leave it there. That does give some spoilers for the first portion of the book, but I do think it's worth going through. If you are someone who is a fan of Dune, of Red Rising, of The Expanse, I think you should read this book. You should read this book. It, again, the quality of the prose, it harkens back to so many of the classic science fiction books that I remember reading. Again, you have to continue to make the comparisons to Dune, but the way it's a deeply poetic book. And again, the sort of the comparisons to something like A Name of the Wind, which again was so renowned for its prose, and again in sort of the same format. Though again, I think candidly this is done way better, and not just because Rothfuss steals money from his fans. No, I think this is truly a situation where this was a book that I had seen on shelves, that I had seen people talking about, but I had slept on. Probably one of my bigger regrets in that regard. I really enjoyed this book. This might be my favorite read so far of 2025. I've read some good books so far in 2025. And I have The Devils on the shelf there behind me, which will be my next video if you're curious about that. Which I haven't read yet and excited to. But this might be my favorite book so far of a read of 2025. I devoured this in 2 days. It was extremely good. I like this a lot. Again, it very much harkens back to a lot of the classics. Again, it wasn't a perfect book. The middle section of the book definitely slows down. It gets a little, and I don't even want to say it's not clunky. It's just deep. You're learning, getting introduced to some of these other characters. You're learning about sort of the veil getting pulled back, and learning more that there's some deeper mysteries at play here in the universe. And I think more importantly, you're starting to set up the character to the point where we sort of are introduced him at the very first page of the book, where he is the Sun Eater. Because the beginning of this book starts with him talking about how he blows up a star and kills billions of people and commits a genocide. That's how this book starts. And it's all about how does he get to this point where he's over 1,000 years old. They call him the Magus. Is he actually magic? What is he? Who's going on? What's there are so many things that are teased beautifully over the course of this. I gave so much praise to Andy Weir's Project Hail Mary in the use of flashbacks, saying that when I was more interested in the flashbacks almost than I was in the regular story, that's how you know you've done something correct. Those tiny kernels, those moments of, wait, where is this going to go? Every single time those are dropped and the POV shifts slightly and it pulls back, you just go, and you realize he's speaking to you, the reader, again. You're just so invested in sort of the words of this older Hadrian coming through on the page. I really enjoyed this book. I mean, this is a 4.5 for me, I'd say. This is if the middle of the book's a little bit flubby. I think we could have cut a little bit out of it. There's some arc stuff there, and I'll talk a little bit about it in a second as I get into spoiler territory. But I think, yeah, this was about as close as you can get to a 5-star for me. It was extremely good. I enjoyed this a lot. Very different than a lot of sort of the fun, lighthearted, like lit RPG stuff that I've been reading this year. But again, harkens back to the books that I grew up sort of in my formative teen years, getting into science fiction and fantasy in a deeper way. So yeah, again, if you're someone who enjoys space operas, if you've read a lot of those other books that I mentioned, and you have not read Empire of Silence, do yourself that favor. It is very good. I think there's 5 books out in the series. I'm not sure if it's done. I should have looked that up before this video started. But here we are, as we get into the second half of this video, which I don't think is going to be quite as long. I just want to talk about sort of my overall thoughts and opinions from like a spoiler perspective, because I'm so curious where this goes. Okay, you've been warned. For the fans, stick around. Okay, here we go. I love an Elder Civilization plotline. Can we just say it? I think maybe the kids like myself that grew up with Halo, ooh, I love me an Elder Civilization. If you've watched my sort of top tropes from fantasy video, that was one of the ones that was mentioned there, and I am a huge fan of the Elder Civilization trope. The second we sort of saw the ruins there on on a mesh, and I went, wait a second, these little these scary tentacle palm trees ain't making that. How is that working? Very, very cool. And then, when he goes in and he's there with Valka, and he has a situation where he sort of goes through the crack in the wall, and there's the alien, the ancient being, the maker, the founder, the builder, the listener, or whatever they're called, the teacher, the various names, the Quiet, which Empire of Silence, the Quiet. Ooh, very cool. I do see how that connected. Over the course of this, and sort of looking back at him through his own eyes. Is he actually going to get magic? Is that where the term? He jokes at the dinner table, when he's there with the other sort of nobles and stuff about being a magus. And I went, is that setting up something? Like, how far is he going to end up going? And I love the idea that, we're setting up so many things at the end of this book, because it had kind of an unabashedly happy ending, which I did not see coming. I was expecting, more of maybe I've been reading too much grimdark. I mean, I was not expecting a sort of objective happy ending for him. He gets to go off. He has his crew around him. He's got his new, high matter sword, which is a great name for like a pseudo lightsaber. Let's go. A high matter sword. Yeah, that's pretty sick. And he's, yes, sure, there's maybe we know there's going to be some issues with, taking over control of the vessel and the crew and the mission down the road. But I was not expecting that. And it honestly just ended in such a not hopeful place, but just there's so many directions this can go. And that's sort of one thing I was worried about, because, it's talked about a little bit. I read Mercy of Gods at the end of last year, beginning of this year as well. And we're kind of getting these sort of flashbacks through journal entry moments as well. And it does have you looking for certain things. But I love how little was drip fed to us to keep it super compelling. But like, where this could go in 10,000 different ways. Does he do it at year 100? Does he do it at year 500? This crusade that he ends up going on that ends with him destroying a star? The vision that he had originally, like, you must stop this, or whatever whatever the line is. Oh, so cool, because I think it would have been so easy to sort of put yourself on rails a little bit too much if you're Ruocchio. But then I also have to give so much respect, because this is not the kind of book that you could have wrote unless you had the entire thing planned. Like, this is sort of like the anti-Pantser book. I mean, yeah, maybe there's some that you could do throughout, but this is like a plotter's dream. I mean, you have to. I have to think back to the Broken Earth trilogy, N.K. Jemisin, the idea that she wrote basically as one book, because the first line of the first book is tied in, the first scene of the first book is tied in the last scene of the last book. Like, it takes so much planning to be able to execute that. So I have to give so much respect to the author. This is such I want you all to, if you're a fan of this book, if you didn't like this book, if you thought it was too clunky or too heavy or all these different things, I still want you to appreciate how technically challenging this book must have been to write. Like, you are walking on a razor's edge the entire time. How much do I give? How much do I give? If I say, and I never see this character again, you can never see that character again. You are setting up and yes, that's like a lot of books and stuff like this, but you're doing so in such a way where you're not giving yourself any room to wiggle. I mean, maybe you're like, oh, sorry, my memory was wrong. Actually, you could, but that would be bad. And I don't think that's going to happen, because like, you have to have done so much legwork to have written a book like this. And yes, like I said, it comes up right up to that line of being too pretentious. Like, it almost reads Shakespearean. And that's on purpose, though. Like, he is that melodramatic person. He's telling his story. Of course he's going to, be a little bit more dramatic. But I don't think this is quite a situation. And again, I'm someone who's sort of had my opinion on things like The Name of the Wind have changed over the years as sort of I've gotten older and being able to look on it with more maturity and more inflection. You know, people giving forgiveness towards some of the things that happened in that book, well, they're like, oh, it's quote telling his own story. Yeah, this is Hadrian telling his own story, but he's doing it in such a more honest way that I don't feel like that's an excuse you're just giving to the author in retrospect. Like, that's what some fans do. That's not the case here at all. And again, setting yourself up from such a compelling hook. This is a man who is in prison telling his story. He's 1,000 years old, and he destroyed a star and won the war. You don't exactly know. You maybe know if you've read more of this series. You're sitting here laughing at me. But yeah, I think, you know, there's still so many, the extrasolarans and all these other things, like, you know, the different empires that are coming in. And yeah, there's still so much world. And we've set ourselves up now in a position where we can go have some like swashbuckling piratey adventures for a couple of books probably, and still have it feel amazing. And the whole time you've got this overarching plot line of the quiet lingering or looming in the background that's going to tie the whole thing together, all knowing we eventually get to this point where he becomes this folk hero of legend or you know, anti-hero of myth or whatever. What a cool book. What a cool book. I was so impressed by this. Yes, the middle sections of the book with him sort of in the Colosso or whatever, and some of the stuff there with Valka, I think went on a little bit too long. I didn't think it needed to be quite that drawn out. Even sort of the final sequences where he's sort of interrogating, you know, the Sealson and all that kind of stuff. I didn't think necessarily, like, I think you probably could have cut like 80 to 100 pages, just sort of in like, not like whole plot points, but just less of everything, a little bit less of everything. Cause it did start to drag a little bit. Maybe again with the center section as well of him sort of being just on the streets of Amesh and all that kind of stuff. Very lucky he trained as a child with no shoes. Those calluses, I imagine, came in handy quite like anybody else, all I could think, oh my God, he's going to step on a needle or something. It's a good thing he's like immune to disease, apparently. Oh my God. Yeah, very, very cool. This book, again, if that's my biggest gripe, a little bit of, but again, you could still attribute it to world building and character building and stories. And like when Kat died and you're just like, your heartstrings. Oh my goodness. This sort of young person now once again completely alone in the world. And I just, again, the picture that gets painted every time he walks, just this clothing sticks in the gravity and all, like, I could just picture it so beautifully. And that's a skill. Like, that is a skill with writing, to be able to craft really compelling characters and dialogue, and also create these settings that you get and you grasp really quickly. Yeah. This was impressive. Like, I do understand the hype behind this book. I also do understand if it's not for some people. Like, I do understand this could just be too much book for some people. Like, I totally get that. Like, this might just be a little bit too much. It is, you have to, again, I am reminiscent to sort of a James S.A. Corey. Like, they're very intense, like, vocal stylings. Obviously, it's not quite as intense as like a Belter Patois or anything. But, you know, like, you have to pay attention when you're reading this book. The amount of names, etc. It's almost Pierce Brown-esque, and though it's not just slamming words together, at least I'm going to give Pierce a little bit of crap for that. But again, it felt so familiar from a dozen different sources, but it did so uniquely and so beautifully. Again, it's equal parts Dune and Warhammer and Red Rising and The Expanse and all these other fantastic series. And again, I think if you're a fan of any one of those, and you haven't read this, you're doing yourself a disservice. So there it is. Yeah, I'm definitely going to keep reading this series. If you guys are a fan of this review, starting from book 2 onwards, I will probably do like my full, almost scene by scene reviews and breakdowns of the books going forward. I really enjoy. They're like hour-long videos, but they're fun to make. Honestly, I did them for Red Rising. So if you're still hanging around at this point in the video and you do want to see more of that kind of stuff, be sure to let me know in the comments. And thank you all so much for watching. The Devils is gonna be up next. More Joe Abercrombie. Let's go. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.